Um, Mic is not quite on, so I'm going to do the introduction. Thank you everybody for coming to the May Lunch and Learn. Today's presentation will be kind of a joint presentation. I will let Jodi introduce the second person, as I'm not quite sure any information on her. But the main presentation will be done by Jodi Flory. She is with the Legislative Services Agency. And yeah, so go right ahead, Jodi.
All right, thanks, Josh. Greetings, Iowa GIS friends. Thanks for joining me today for this Lunch and Learn about Iowa redistricting. This presentation is actually a long time coming. I think we had initially scheduled it for January, but postponed it a couple times due to the delays in the census data and the redistricting timeline. So just a little background about myself. I run a GIS consulting firm called Cornerstone Geospatial Consulting, and I contract with state, local, and regional governments in a variety of GIS disciplines. Some of you may be familiar with me based on my work through the Department of Education on school district mapping. But one of the more unique hats that I get to wear is redistricting. And redistricting was actually my first real job in GIS, and something I haven't really been able to shake loose of since. I'm now on my third redistricting cycle with the Iowa Legislative Services Agency. Also with me today is Heidi Burhans from the Iowa Secretary of State's office. I'm so grateful to have her join us today. She's going to be speaking in more detail about the local redistricting process. Heidi, do you mind introducing yourself briefly?
Heidi, you may need to unmute yourself.
That's okay. I will just move on, and when it gets to her part, we'll switch that over, and hopefully she can figure out the audio on her end. But I think we're going to start with a quick little poll. Josh, do you mind getting that going?
Yeah, I'm working on it. It's not wanting to allow me to do that right now for some reason. Of course.
I can see you, Heidi. Can you unmute yourself?
I am so sorry about that. I didn't realize I was having audio problems until, oh shoot, until I saw you pop up. And so trying to get that sorted, sorry.
You're fine.
All right, so Jodi, I had to steal the presenter in order to do
Sure,
it. So
that's fine.
yeah, all right. All right, there. Everyone, you should see a polling tab and a question. So you can go ahead and answer the questions. It's open for 2 minutes.
Enter your attendee ID number, followed by your music.
So there's only a few people left that haven't started the poll. So once it looks like everybody's answered it, I'll go ahead and close it.
Great, thanks, Josh.
And if you came in after I opened it, you won't be able to answer the poll. Sorry, that's just the limitation of the program.
No worries. And this is just to get a general idea who's on online today and who's has experience and who doesn't. That'll help guide our presentation a little bit.
Couple more seconds. All right, so I think you see the answers then in the
I
board tab?
do.
All right, cool. All right, then let me go ahead and
Wow, it looks like we have a pretty even split between those that have had to do redistricting before and those that haven't. And it looks like a lot of you will be doing the redistricting, so that's great. I'm glad you're joining us today. So we'll go ahead and get started with the presentation. I'm gonna go ahead and reshare my screen here. Can everybody see this?
Yep.
And I'm gonna go ahead and stop my video because that's really distracting to speak with. Okay. So a quick little overview of what we're going to be covering today. We're going to discuss what redistricting is and what makes Iowa different. We're going to discuss what's different in this decade. We'll go over the Iowa standards in redistricting, get into the city and county redistricting protocols, and also discuss the Iowa timeline, which is very important this year. And then discuss some software solutions and also go over some tips and hints in redistricting. So I imagine most of you know what redistricting is, but it is the process of redrawing electoral district boundaries to create equal population in each district. And this occurs after each decennial census. There are a lot of districts in Iowa that are subject to redistricting every 10 years. And each has its own nuances and own specifics in how the districts are created. For example, congressional districts have to follow county boundaries. Legislative districts nest within each other. There's 2 House districts for every Senate seat. County supervisor redistricting depends on the plan type, but oftentimes have to follow precinct boundaries. And then city wards must also follow precinct boundaries. So it may seem a bit confusing, but it's a process that because it only happens every 10 years, but the standards are very clearly laid out in Iowa code. Next, let's briefly talk about why redistricting is necessary. The 1960s really brought a redistricting revolution with the one person, one vote principle. And the subsequent 1965 Voting Rights Act prohibited practices to dilute or deny the rights of minorities to vote, effectively making gerrymandering unlawful. Gerrymandering, if you'll remember from your high school civics class, is a process of drawing districts to unfairly favor one political group over another. This process is as old as redistricting. The image up in the upper right is an excerpt from the Boston Gazette way back in 1812 detailing the new monster that appeared in Massachusetts redistricting. So the US Constitution was changed in response to one person, one vote, requiring that districts be nearly equal as practicable, and the Iowa Constitution followed suit. In 1980, after the 1972 redistricting plan was deemed invalid, legislation was then introduced to codify the Iowa redistricting process and the standards in Iowa Code Chapter 42. Finally, districts are simply an important element of representative democracy. Populations do not stay the same. They move, they grow, they shrink within a geography, and redistricting equalizes that population in electoral districts. I had to throw in this interesting graphic from a mapping app from Slate called Equal Population Mapper, which allows users to visualize what the US would look like if we needed to create 2 equal districts with specific areas of the United States, such as New York City, LA, or Wyoming. This graphic compares the US coastal county populations in orange with what would be an equal population in the Midwest by comparison in red. So you can see the disparity in population or in district sizes based on population. And if you can imagine how many rural counties in Iowa it takes to equal the population of Polk County, it explains why there's often a gigantic Western Iowa congressional district. It's simply due to the low population in rural Iowa counties. So why is Iowa different? Iowa redistricting is a standout among various methods of how states handle the redistricting process. Just do some Googling on Iowa redistricting and you'll find plenty of articles and discussions of Iowa methods. What's different about Iowa is that redistricting is handled by the Iowa Legislative Services Agency. And there is also a temporary advisory commission that sort of guides the process. They have no part in actually drawing the boundaries and no real influence over the process. And what's different too is that once the LSA draws the plan, it goes to the legislature for an up or down vote. And then what's also different about Iowa is that political data and other demographic data are strictly excluded in drawing proposed districts. In other states, often the existing districts will just expand or contract to equalize the population. However, in Iowa, we wipe the slate clean, so to speak. Since if we were to consider the existing district boundaries, we would in effect be working to protect incumbent legislators. Iowa's population, though increasingly diverse, has not been subject to the Voting Rights Act since there isn't a sufficient minority population to create a minority-majority congressional district or legislative district. What's also different that there hasn't been any lawsuits in the Iowa process, where many other states are entrenched in litigation following redistricting. If you're interested in learning more about the Iowa process and why it's different, Ed Cook, who's part of the redistricting team at LSA Legal Counsel, has some great resources available on the Iowa redistricting process on the LSA website. And I'll just go ahead and slide this over. And here's the LSA website, the introduction to redistricting, some various guides, references to redistricting and Iowa code. This is also where you can track the legislative redistricting process. So you can also look in years past through the processes that occurred. So as updates happen in Iowa redistricting, this is where we post that information. This is also where you can find district maps once proposed plans are released. There'll be a link to download the plan in a GIS format and also a feature service with additional download options for you. So what's different this decade? Well, the census is very delayed due to COVID-19, of course, and the delays are unprecedented. The apportionment count that's required to be delivered to the White House by December 31 was missed. It just was released in April. And the PL data is not expected to come out until August and September. This is the data that we do the redistricting with. And because of that delay, the statutory guide deadline of September 15th for legislative redistricting is likely to be missed, which means it goes to the Supreme Court to draw the plan. Now, there's no indication that the Supreme Court wouldn't kick it back to LSA to actually complete the redistricting, but it is interesting that we're in this pinch timeline and going to miss that deadline. And obviously, because the legislative process is delayed, that means the local redistricting timeline is going to be very pinched. What is also different, in 2018, there was legislative action that changed redistricting for county supervisor Plan 3 types. So this means that now LSA will draw these plans for the counties. And we'll go into that in more detail later. What's also different is differential privacy. Now, I'm not going to go into much detail on this. There's a lot of information out there about differential privacy, but in short, it's a method that the Census Bureau uses to introduce noise into census geography to protect the privacy of populations. And this is a hot topic. It's being contested by multiple states, starting with Alabama, who introduced litigation against the Census Bureau. And I mention it because if the case moves forward, it will definitely cause more kinks and more delays in the process. So it's something to be mindful of. So Iowa code explicitly states that census data is to be used for redistricting. The PL data is the public law 94-171 data is is the data that is to be used for redistricting, and this is the first release of the decennial census data after apportionment, after the apportionment counts that came out, and that's just state populations. And this tabulates down to the census block, all populations within Iowa. So what's this graphic on the right side details, kind of the hierarchy and geography in the census data. TIGER comes from, TIGER is a shortened acronym for Topologically Integrated Geographic Encoding and Referencing System, which is a mouthful, but it basically means that the data is topologically correct and the key census geographies don't cross over other geographies. So they nest within each other. For example, tracts don't cross county boundaries. Block groups nest within tracts down to the census block, which is the smallest piece in the essential building block in local redistricting. The lowest geography we use in congressional redistricting is the county, and in legislative redistricting, we use the VTD, which is voting tabulation district, which is aligned as closely as possible with the existing precincts. Gary Root is still part of the redistricting team at LSA, submits VTD boundaries to the Census Bureau through the Block Boundary Suggestion Program. The census reporting programs are very important and an often overlooked part of the redistricting process. This is where you locally can have a direct impact on the quality of the census data that's used for redistricting. If you participate in BAS, the Boundary and Annexation Program, those boundaries are directly used in the redistricting process, and it will cause a headache for your county auditor if the geography is not correct, because the census data is authoritative over any local data. I work on SDRP, the School District Review Program with the Iowa Department of Education, and they took on this reporting duty to the Census Bureau since in 2010, the census did not have the correct number of school districts in Iowa. There was a school consolidation that went unreported, and the boundaries were not well aligned with the legal boundaries of school districts, creating a headache for school director redistricting. I included a little graphic here at the bottom to kind of detail this misalignment in the census geography. So in red is the census geography, in blue is the local geography of a city boundary. And if the city boundary is used in a legislative district boundary, which is a common practice, then it creates an issue in reprecincting, particularly if there's population within this area of discrepancy. It really causes problems. So next, let's have a look at Iowa redistricting standards. They are the gold standard for nonpartisan redistricting. Iowa Code clearly states the standards and their priorities and importance in redistricting. Population is #1 in redistricting. Next is respect for political subdivisions, keeping them whole as much as possible. Then next is contiguity and compactness of districts. And then also the interrelationship of districts, like I spoke about the nesting of districts. And then overarching over all of this is the unlawful practice of gerrymandering, which Iowa specifically prohibits in Iowa Code in drawing districts to favor an incumbent, a political party, or any other person or group. And now we're going to take a look at these standards in more detail, since they're really key in understanding how districts should be redrawn in Iowa. So #1 was population. That is the factor that we consider in legislative and congressional district redistricting. Only total population is used. Nothing other than the head counts should be used, and everything else shouldn't be used unless constitutionally required by the Voting Rights Act. Now, there is not sufficient, like I said before, there's not sufficient population of minority demographics to constitute a congressional district or a legislative seat as of now. Now, this could be an issue in local redistricting to consider, but total population is what you want to focus on. And then the allowable population variances between congressional districts is extremely low. It's less than 1% variance in population between districts. Legislative districts has a little bit higher allowance, less than 5%. And supervisor districts are also very restrictive, less than 1% population variance between districts. So this is pretty simple math. You take the total population of an area, you divide it up by the number of districts you need. In 2010, Iowa's population was 3,046,000 and some change. You divide that by 4 congressional districts, and so then you have the ideal population for each district being 761,000 and some change. You can see by this chart that the deviations from each congressional district that we created in 2010 are extremely low. The most was 41 people different from the ideal population. And you can see these deviations are well below the 1% allowance that we're given, but we worked really hard to keep districts as equal as possible while still creating compact and contiguous districts. Respect for political subdivision is the next standard in the hierarchy of redistricting. And in legislative redistricting, counties generally take the precedence over cities, meaning the preference is to keep the county whole rather than keeping a city that crosses over the county boundary whole. And the general rule being the most populous subdivision should be split over the smaller subdivision. And this is likewise for local redistricting. City splits should be kept to a minimum, and it's specifically noted in code that cities cannot divide into 2 or more supervisor districts unless they're larger than the ideal district size. I included a screenshot here of something we tabulate before we ever begin redistricting. A list of city and county populations and the minimum number of splits that are required for a House and Senate seat. And that really helps us evaluate if the plan meets this standard. And of course, due to the nature of building a statewide plan and making all the districts work together, extra splits are really a natural occurrence. However, we will sacrifice the shape of a district in order to keep counties whole. The next standard is contiguity. This is an absolute requirement. Districts that meet only at a point are not contiguous. Compactness is another factor that we consider. And in Iowa, we use 2 measures for compactness: length width compactness and perimeter measure. And length width means equal, the length and width being equal means the district is perfectly compact. So like a circle is the most compact you can get, but obviously there's very little circular geographies in Iowa. There are more squares. So square is the next best thing. Perimeter is an additional measure that we use with the understanding that a higher perimeter means a less compact district. Compactness is a useful measurement, particularly when you look at how other states do redistricting. You can see here where Iowa really shines. This is a graphic I found from Statista about America's most gerrymandered districts. If you can see district number 3 in Illinois, if you use the length width compactness test, it actually is fairly compact. The length of the district is similar to the width of the district, but once you run the perimeter test, you can see it is not a compact district. So thankfully, we don't create districts like this in Iowa. This is a problem in other states. This is outright gerrymandering, and that's a dirty word in Iowa. So speaking of gerrymandering, prohibitive factors are using any data to draw boundaries to favor a political party or an incumbent legislator, a member of Congress, any other person or group, a racial minority group, any of that. And here are some specific factors that you want to make sure you're excluding in redistricting. Addresses of incumbents, any political affiliations of registered voters, previous election results, and really any demographic information other than the population headcount. And like I mentioned, except required by the Constitution and the laws of the United States with the Voting Rights Act. So here we are with the redistricting timeline. Redistricting really kicks off with the census release of PL 94-171 data. That's what we're all waiting for. The official release date was set for September 30, but they did announce that they will make, in August, they'll make a legacy format available. And this is supposed to be identical to the official release data set, except that The official release data is going to be in a GIS ready format. It's going to be ready to consume in your software immediately. The legacy data takes quite a bit of processing to get it into a GIS friendly format. However, we will be receiving legacy format data from our vendor within a few days of its release, and we will make that data available to the Secretary of State's office and may even post it on our website for folks to download, just so you can get at that data just as early as we can. So once the data is released, it kicks off the congressional and legislative redistricting, and this is going to be generally fall of 2021. We don't know the exact timeline. There, you know, as I mentioned before, there's that statutory deadline of September 15th for Iowa to adopt a congressional and legislative district plan. We do expect that we will not meet that deadline, so we'll see what the Iowa Supreme Court says about that. But you know, we would assume that they're going to kick it back to LSA to complete the redistricting. So we have 45 days to complete a plan. And if that plan is rejected by the legislature, LSA has another 30 days to submit Plan 2. And the potential is, if they vote that plan down, to go to a Plan 3, which gives us another 30 days to submit a plan. So you can see this is gonna, you know, increase the timeline quite a bit if plans are rejected by the legislature. So once plans are approved, then that kicks off the local redistricting process. First comes city reprecincting. They have 60 days to work through local reprecincting for cities, and sort of in tandem with this is city wards. Now we are encouraging locals to not take the full 60 days. I'm sure Heidi's going to reiterate this as well, but with the timeline crunch, if you do the math, you know, if we're not getting data until August, you know, if we take even just 30 days to get Plan 1 out, we're into September, October, November, and you start giving 60 to 90 days for the local redistricting, and we're going to break through some of the other deadlines that come along with the local redistricting. The last deadline being when precincts become effective in January 15 of 2022. And that happens because there are filing deadlines for county candidates that has to be done by March 7 of 2022. So you can see there's a really tight turnaround for the local redistricting in this decade. So now I'm going to pass it off to Heidi to discuss the local redistricting process in more detail. Heidi?
Can you hear me?
Yep, I can.
Oh, good. Okay. I always have trouble getting my audio sorted with WebEx. Okay, so with the local redistricting, again, Jodi was spot on. I will stress the 60, 90 days. We really don't have time for that in this year's pinch deadline. So I think one of the ideas is that when that PL data is released in August, for anyone who feels comfortable working with that legacy format, hopefully counties will start taking a look at it and working on it. Certainly there are some of the more populous counties and counties with the larger cities may not be able to do a whole lot until they see what the legislative districts are going to be, but still, I think every county should be getting familiar with their data as soon as it becomes available. And what we've been told by the Census Bureau is the only difference between the legacy data released in August and the data that will be released in September is that the legacy data may not be as user-friendly. You might have to do a little more with your technology to be able to work with it, but the data is exactly the same. And if both sets of data will go through the exact same quality control. So for the county redistricting and reprecincting, the Board of Supervisors and their temporary redistricting commissions will work closely with the county auditor. And there's a difference in each of the three plans and who's responsible for drawing those lines, and I'll go over those in just a second. There's a series of items that have to be submitted to the Secretary of State's office from the counties in order for their plans to be finalized. And before, one of those steps, one of those items is that the counties have to supply an ordinance, submit an ordinance with their map that details the description of their precinct. And before they can adopt that ordinance, they have to have a public hearing, presenting their plans to the public and allowing for public feedback. And certainly, every county who has GIS staff or department, persons with GIS experience, they would be crazy not to work with them. The counties hopefully will be able to have assistance from the GIS community within their county government. And the role that the GIS can play is in the plan development and the verification. So going back to what Jodi had pointed out about the precinct lines and supervisor lines having to align with the census block data boundaries and not just the local geography. That's one of the major roles GIS can play throughout this process, is ensuring that those boundaries align with the census block data. And also, we think that all of you can help communicate the plans to the public. You tend to understand intimately the data and what it's describing and what it is, and hopefully you'll be able to assist the boards of supervisors as they hold their public hearings. So for the County Board of Supervisors, there are 3 plans, and Plan 1, which has most counties, is where the supervisors are elected at large, and so there are no supervisor districts. Those counties will still have to draw their precinct boundaries, and for possibly for some counties, they will see no change in their precinct boundaries, but they're still going to have to submit their plan and ordinance to us. It's still good for them to make sure the public understands their lines aren't changing, but Plan 1 counties should not just assume their lines won't change. They still need to go through the data and double check the sizes of their precincts, because precincts have a cap of a population of 3,500. Plan 2, supervisor districts, the supervisors have a residency requirement. They have to live within their district, but they are elected by all of the people in the county. And in the Plan 2 counties, the boards of supervisors had to appoint a temporary redistricting commission by May 15th. And in Plan 2, the supervisors will draw their precincts, and the temporary redistricting commission will draw the supervisor district boundaries. And they still will have to get board approval once they've submitted a plan to the Board of Supervisors. So they'll still be working somewhat with the Board of Supervisors and with the county auditor to make sure they've got the right software, they got the right tools, and they're working with the right data, of course. Plan 3 supervisor counties, we actually have not quite half of the counties of Plan 3. Here, the supervisors have a district residency requirement, and only the voters residing within that district can vote for that supervisor seat. So with Plan 3, the temporary redistricting commission will draw the precinct lines, and then LSA will draw the supervisor lines. And of course, that also is pending Board of Supervisor approval. Once LSA has a map that they think will work, then they'll kick it back to the supervisors for them to to sign off on. Then for reprecincting, Iowa Code sections 49.4 and 49.5 really outline the majority of the rules that need to be followed to establish the new precincts and supervisor districts. Again, going back to a point that Jodi's touched on several times is nesting. So the cities who have wards they have to draw their plans first, and then they submit those to the counties. Now, the counties aren't necessarily signing off on the city plans, but in Iowa law, a city ward is a precinct. But precincts can only have a cap of 3,500. And in a city like Des Moines, I think they have 4 wards. 4 wards, those 4 wards have populations well beyond 3,500 in each of those. So in the larger cities that have wards, they may end up having several precincts within a ward. But the precinct, any precinct that would, any ward that would have multiple precincts, those precincts need to be wholly contained within that ward. You're not going to have precincts crossing over ward lines. And again, aside from the points that Jodi's made about population is what drives the redistricting and reprecincting in Iowa, in the precincting, what drives it is the population cap of 3,500. And we also have limitations of that, that deviation, that minimal, maximum allowable deviation. And then townships as precincts, because it's a deal to not divide the political subdivisions unless necessary. And so often you will see townships as whole precincts, or townships combined with other townships being contiguous and still meeting that population cap. And a lot of these points we will have more detailed in our reprecincting and redistricting instruction manual for the counties. And then those will also include code citations, so you know exactly where to go to find more information about those pieces. And again, going back to that, an additional point that Jodi hit on is using the census block boundaries, period. There's no exception to that. The lines have to match the census block boundaries. It really can cause quite a pickle if the precinct or district boundaries don't align with those census block boundaries. And then with city annexations, any city that has annexed territory after January 1, 2020, between then and when the reprecincting and redistricting is happening, you will need to exclude the population of that city annexed territory from the unincorporated territory. And with the supervisor district, the way you will determine the ideal district population is dividing the county's population by the number of supervisor districts. And then that deviation between the districts needs to be less than 1%. Again, you're going to follow political subdivisions with the city and township boundaries. And then the supervisor district lines must follow the precinct boundaries for the Plan 3 counties. Again, we're still expecting the compact and contiguous territory requirements to be met, the census block boundaries, and then also the redistricting and reprecincting is driven by population. So it's very, very important that the commissions, the temporary redistricting commissions, or the boards of supervisors, if they're the ones doing the precincting in the Plan 1 counties, They absolutely cannot take into consideration addresses of incumbents, including themselves, and some counties may have appointed one supervisor to their temporary redistricting commission. So everyone involved in drawing the map has to remember they cannot consider addresses of incumbents, political affiliations of the registered voters, any kind of past election results, or any other demographic information beyond the census head count when they're drawing the map. It's integral to Iowa being such a gold standard for all other states. And the county responsibilities. Again, all of these items in purple are where GIS can be of invaluable service to the counties as they move through these processes. Preparing the plans and working with the temporary redistricting commissions or the Board of Supervisors, assisting the auditors in developing the plans. In some counties, I believe the auditors or someone on their staff will be doing the actual drawing of the lines, depending on who has the software in the county. And our office is working on sourcing mapping software for all of the counties. That is our goal because we are requiring electronic submission this year, which we already were planning on that, but then because of the pinched timeline, having everyone use mapping software and submit everything in a digital format will help tremendously with the workflow process and if maps have to bounce back to the counties from either our office or LSA. With the digital submission, that really means that shapefile or block equivalency files have to be used for the map. So we're not talking about just scanning everything in and emailing it to us. We really no longer will accept maps that are just hand-drawn with marker, colored pencil, and I'm not poking fun at anyone. I know that's been done in the past, but now we're to a point where we really need everyone to be using a digital format. And certainly you can be of great assistance in helping those teams certifying the precinct population, the supervisor districts or the city wards, if any of you or your counties plan to offer some type of mapping service to the cities who draw wards. With the Redistricting Commission and the plan hearings, assisting with mapping the new districts, which we're guessing maybe so many of you attending this presentation today will be involved in some way or another with the actual mapping. Again, with the public feedback, you could be of great help in making sure people understand, the public understands the descriptions of the lines and boundaries. And then the written legal description needs to be defined by ordinance. And so meets and bounds, that's really, really important that the ordinance clearly defines the description of the wards, the precincts, the supervisor district. We're hoping that the redistricting, reprecincting, mapping software option that we're able to source for the counties will be able to export a description of those districts, something that I think would be really, really helpful to everyone. And then the deadlines, again, like what Jodi's timeline pointed out, all of these new boundaries go into effect January 15th. We have a primary election in early June, every even numbered year. That will not be changing. And because the primary will happen at the beginning of June next year, then we have to have the candidate filing deadline set well in advance. Those will not be changing. So the county candidate filing deadlines start March 7th, and they'll be open for a couple of weeks. But even though that filing period is longer than just a couple of days, all the candidates need to know what their districts are before they even start filing, because they're going to be getting out with petitions and getting signatures from voters. So they need to understand if they're in a supervisor district, who they can have sign their petition. And so having those boundaries effective January 15th helps all candidates at all levels. The federal, state, and local candidates need to understand their boundaries well before they actually file their paperwork. And here is a look at just a couple of pages from the worksheets that we've prepared. These worksheets will go out with the instructions manual to the county, and the worksheet file actually consists of several pages, but this was to give you an idea of what those pages, what some of those pages will look like. And in the blue, you'll see the code citations. So all throughout the worksheet, there will be those easy links for you to access if you need more information about why you have to follow a certain population rule, or where you can find more information about some aspect of the process. And right here, right now, you'll see at the top of the first page on the left, it says Plan 2 and Plan 3 counties only. We haven't finished refining this. We're going to break it out more so that there will be worksheets clearly defined for Plan 1 counties, worksheets clearly defined for Plan 2, and worksheets clearly defined for Plan 3, so that no one needs to wonder if they're using the right worksheets for their county. And that also reminds me, in case you are unsure of which plan your county is, just check in with the county auditor. They'll be able to tell you what the plan is and what the current precinct or supervisor district boundaries look like too. And I think is that, yep, back to Jodi.
Thanks, Heidi. That's very helpful. Next, we're going to look at some software solutions for redistricting. A basic GIS software is all you really need to build a plan. You know, we build by census block. A block equivalency is ultimately, you know, kind of that lowest level geography that the Secretary of State's office is going to need to evaluate a plan. So, you know, there's some basic redistricting tools that can be helpful, but I mean, ultimately, all of these softwares on the back end are just coding that census block layer with the district that you're building. So, I mean, if you're not using any redistricting software, you could essentially just take the census block data set, you know, add a field for district ID and begin selecting census blocks and coding the district ID for each census block. Now, obviously, that's very time consuming. And, you know, so we would look to tools to assist this process. You know, like Heidi mentioned, Secretary of State's office is looking at options to provide some redistricting tools to locals to expedite the process. So, but basic redistricting tools that you can find in most software is a setup. The setup of census data is already built into the software, so you don't have to import data in and set that up. It's already pre-defined in the software, and oftentimes will come with, you know, plan building templates. So the geography is already symbolized nicely. You don't have to do a lot of work with, you know, building a nice map to work from. The templates are already built into the software. All redistricting software allows you to build districts interactively. There's a variety of selection tools to select the geography and assign it to a district and unassign it, and all while watching a live update of that population down to the metrics of variations and deviations between districts, the compactness, compactness measures such as length, width, and perimeter can all be built into the software. And so it's a live update as you build the districts. Also built into the software is typically a plan integrity check. So it is kind of a topology tool to check that there's no misassigned blocks within your county, so to speak, so that obviously it doesn't allow for overlaps between districts, but that it meets the basic plan requirements in building a plan. And then finally, there's often tools to export plan reports, you know, that list all those various metrics of the districts There's also tools to export meets and bounds, which can be incredibly helpful, as Heidi mentioned, in getting the legal description built for each precinct and county supervisor plan. That's kind of an auto-magically thing, and it's going to be aligned to follow the census geography. That's not always a perfect solution. It would probably need some editing, but that's a helpful tool that's built into software as well as the ability to create some nice maps and to share those maps with the public for evaluation. So next I'll go over a few redistricting tool or softwares that you can purchase. Actually, this first one is free. This is an ESRI extension that is built on top of ArcMap, and it's called Districting for ArcGIS. I evaluated this a year or two ago when we were looking at redistricting solutions for LSA, and it is a pretty robust little tool for a free tool. It doesn't do everything, but it is something, if there is no other software available, this is a tool that you can download for free and use and create plans with. ESRI also offers a fantastic online solution that comes in both a single-use license and a full portal instance that allows citizens even to build plans, or anyone within your county, or if you wanted to share the software with your city to create plans and share back and forth. It's a really great tool. The concept is very similar to ArcGIS Online, with the ability to create groups and build and share plans within groups and keep those plans private until they're ready to be shared out to the public. And then it allows you to quickly share those plans out in an easy to use web map that people are familiar with. And it contains all the key redistricting tools offered in a traditional desktop solution. The data is also built in, and it's often a more attractive solution over standard desktop applications, just because it's just so much more user friendly for anyone to dive in. You don't have to have the GIS knowledge to be able to run the software. And it can be deployed in a software as a service solution through ESRI managed cloud services, or deployed completely on premises as well. Another redistricting solution is from Calico Corporation. Maptitude may be familiar to some, but probably not very many. It's a pretty old software, but they have a niche in redistricting. Maptitude is actually what LSA chose to do redistricting, mainly because it's relatively unchanged from 10 years ago, which was very attractive to my non-GIS colleagues. And also for security purposes within the LSA, the redistricting team will be working completely offline, which works well for that particular solution. Finally, there's another one that I know of. Citygate has a solution called Autobound. They actually were the first redistricting software I used 20 years ago. So that is still around. They've actually transitioned their application to a web-based solution. I have not demoed or explored that option, but that also would be another solution to look into. There are others that you can find online. There's also completely online tools to use for redistricting that have the geographies built in and are ready to go. But I say beware, because they're definitely more exploratory in nature, and they're really insufficient for true redistricting. And actually many of those solutions build in other census demographics that are prohibited in Iowa redistricting. So certainly beware of those tools. So finally, we'll conclude with a few tips and hints for redistricting in 2021. Assert your GIS expertise. If you are not already a friend of your county auditor, become one. It's really important to have that relationship. They will rely heavily on your expertise. Even if there's a tool that's offered by SOS to do the redistricting locally, you can help them along in that process. And you understand your geography better than anyone else in the state. So assert your expertise and be willing to assist your elected officials through the process. Prepare now. It's time to get the data. The census geography is out, so you can look at the geography. There's no population in it, but you can get familiar with it and be ready to hit the ground running once the legislative and congressional districts are approved. And of course, you it's difficult to begin until those legislative and congressional plans are approved, but you can begin to get a feel for how population has changed within your jurisdiction. You can also, get a better understanding of, where population has changed drastically and is going to cause for a new precinct, for example. And you can look at those precinct boundaries, because sometimes those do hold over from cycle to cycle. Sometimes precinct boundaries change very little, so you can kind of get a feel for if they're going to hit that $3,500 or 3,500 population limit, and then get a good understanding of the Secretary of State's submittal requirements and the tools that they will be offering. Like get familiar with the worksheets and kind of track what's happening and what's being released by the Secretary of State. The Secretary of State's office will be also doing some training across the state. This was initially focused really for auditors, but Heidi was welcoming anybody in the GIS community to attend those trainings as well. So be aware of those. And also an important consideration for county redistricting is that the precinct plan that you submit to the Secretary of State's office may ultimately drive, for those Plan 3 county types, it's really going to drive what LSA can build for a supervisor plan. And, if we're not able to get a supervisor plan out of the precinct plan that's submitted by the county, we're going to have to kick that back, forcing the counties to kind of go back to the drawing board to redevelop precinct plans. And that's just going to further complicate the timeline. So that's just a little hint to you to kind of make sure that there is a doable county district plan out of the precinct plan. It's especially important for smaller counties. Obviously, Polk County is going to have lots of options, but some of those smaller counties, it's really directly driven from the precinct plan. And finally, be mindful of the census release dates, since this is really what kicks off the whole timeline. So while the legacy data is going to be available in sometime in August and should be identical to the official release data, we also advise any plans that you're building with the legacy format data to be run through the official PL data once that's released in September. So just be mindful of those dates and be mindful of what's happening at LSA as plans are approved and finalized by the legislature. So that's all I have today. I'd like to turn it over to questions. I realize we're right at 1 o'clock, so we're bumping into our time limit here, but I'd be happy to entertain questions if anybody has anything. All right, it's all crickets. So I think I'll go ahead and close the presentation. Thank you all so much for attending. Certainly reach out to me or Heidi at the Secretary of State's office if you have questions. And happy redistricting. We wish you luck.
Hey, this is Micah. Can anyone hear me?
Yep.
We can hear you, Micah.
I just want to say thank you very much, Jodi, for your presentation today. Tons of good information. Good luck this year. Crazy year that it is. And I wanted to let everybody know about the Lunch and Learns. We are, since we have the ITAG conference in mid-June next month, we will not be doing a Lunch and Learn, and we're taking a hiatus, AKA a vacation, in July. So we'll be, I'll be sending out notices in late July for the August that we have lined up. So stay tuned. And I just wanted to, if we go a little quiet for a while, I wanted to let everyone know why.
And I'll also add that I'll try to pop out any information from the Secretary of State's office or that comes out from LSA through the IJIC you know, listserv so that you guys can keep track with what's going on.
Please do, Jodi. You can send it to me or to Josh or anybody, you know, send it to the email list directly, however you feel comfortable doing it. We'll make sure it gets disseminated.
Sounds great.
All right. Thanks, everybody, and have a great Wednesday.
Thank you.
Yep, thank you all.